So that's completely up to you. So let's take a look at the content that will be covered in today's session. Mr. Edwards will be taking us through creative thinking and problem solving, stress and crisis management, and then I'll work through professionalism and ethics with you, and then we go back to Mr. Edwards to go through the marketing function, and then I'll finish off with the production function, and at the end, if we have some time, we will go through some exam tips and techniques. So like I said, grade 11, it's a long session, it's 2 hours. So when you get this, do break it up into little chunks so you don't get too much information at one time, but do make sure that you are aware of everything that is covered in quarter 2, and as well as the exam guidelines and the amended ATP to make sure that you are studying the content that is relevant for you this quarter. So let's go straight into our first section on creative thinking and problem solving, and Mr. Edwards will take you through that.
Thank you very much, Mr. de Klerk. Really excited for the session today. And this creative thinking session is very important, and we'll go through some specific pointers that would be worthwhile when you are writing your assessments. All right, to start us off, we're going to look at the meaning of creative thinking. All right, so the meaning of creative thinking is the ability to think of original, varied, new ideas or new approaches. There might be a couple of current businesses that come to mind when referring to creative business practices, the likes of Apple, Amazon, all bringing around different innovative new ideas. All right, so also creative thinking, it's the ability to be original, innovative, and resourceful. Now, the reason that you want to be innovative is to create that competitive advantage. If you're able to create that competitive advantage, then for obvious reasons, you'll be able to gain that market share and gain a profit thereafter. All right. You must try to think differently and to apply that differentiation when looking at business problems. All right.
So this is quite an important section because we've seen the effects of COVID on all the businesses.
Sure.
So businesses now, as much as they ever had to have been, needing to be as creative as possible to make sure that they can still, not even about getting the competitive edge, just to stay in the market. So
for sure.
Grade 11s, if this comes up as an essay question, make sure you're looking for lots of examples where businesses have been created. There are plenty of examples in this area. Back to you, Mr. Edwards.
Yeah, thank you. COVID-19 has been a prime example as to how businesses have had to adapt. And that's the key, trying to adapt and solve problems using creativity. All right, so there's two methods that we look at when thinking about or looking at thinking and creative thinking and routine thinking. There's a difference between the two. If you look at creative thinking, generally you are looking just thinking about different aspects using the right side of your brain. Okay, focuses on creativity, imagination, insight, holistic thought, art and music awareness. Now, you might think that you fall into this category, right? The other one would be routine thinking. Generally, you are going to be using the left side of your brain. Okay, these are things like looking at analytical thought, logic, reasoning, number and written skills. So these are sorts of things that come up when you are doing mathematics, those sorts of logical way of thinking. All right, another thing that we look at is conventional versus non-conventional solutions. So you might have an issue that comes up, a problem at work, and generally you would be thinking about it in terms of conventional solutions. So getting solutions that are based on and that conforms to what is generally done or believed. Now, as we know, in business, that is maybe not good enough. Okay, you need to look at it outside the box. So that's why we have non-conventional solutions. Getting solutions that are not based on and do not conform to what is generally done or believed. So I'm sure you can understand if this is the case, if you use non-conventional solutions, that is where you might be able to take that competitive advantage, or in the current circumstances, COVID-19, at least stay in the market. All right. Looking at ways in which a business can create an environment that stimulates and promotes creative thinking. Now remember, grade 11s, we as business studies teachers, we're trying to train you to be business entrepreneurs. All right, so you're looking at ways in which you can solve problems and assist your staff to be creative. So let's have a look at some ways in which you can be creative. Okay, or create an environment that allows your staff to be creative. Emphasize the importance of creative thinking, so encouraging your staff to come up with new ideas. Ensure that you allow time for brainstorming sessions. Quite a good technique was to have suggestion boxes available. So it also means that these sorts of suggestions will be anonymous. All right, that's very important because it removes any bias. And also if people are a little bit shy when giving their suggestions, this allows them to be anonymous. And that can help out giving people the ability to have their say. Train staff in innovative techniques. Okay, we'll talk about a couple of techniques in a moment. Encourage job swaps. This is quite useful. I mean, if you are going to be considering a different point of view, then that can give you that different idea, and consider other people's ideas, right? Encourage alternative ways of working. Use technology. That's something that COVID-19 and lockdown has presented. Even us as teachers, we've had to look at different ways in which to educate and communicate with our students. Apologies for that. Respond enthusiastically. Okay, this is very important. As a leader, you don't want to be too harsh on an employee that's given an idea. You want to respond enthusiastically. You want to encourage that person to give an idea in future. So respond enthusiastically.
I think it's also important to remember to our grade 11 learners that a lot of us think that we are not creative. Or we are told somewhere that you've got no creative ideas or so on, but it's actually a skill that can be developed 100%. And learned over time. Yes, some of us are more creative than others, but it is actually skills, and by doing these things, you actually find yourself be able to become more creative naturally, and as you go on, it becomes second nature to you.
Yeah, I mean, you're training your brain to be creative. I've had a couple of discussions in the class, and I've asked the learners, what do they do to be creative? And some of them say, well, I listen to music. And some people might enable them to be creative in different ways. So that's very useful. All right, benefits of creative thinking in the workplace. So now we're looking at the reasons why we want employees to be creative in the workplace. So obviously, better ideas are generated, and that creates that competitive advantage. Complex business problems may be solved. COVID-19 has presented several different issues that businesses have had to deal with. You look at restaurants. Suddenly restaurants have to be closed by 10 o'clock. They've got to look at different ways in which they can do their business and satisfy their customers. Productivity can increase. Imagine if you've introduced a new way in which to produce new products. That can ensure that you are increasing your productivity. More confidence. The more and more people or your employees can contribute, the more confident they will get. And that's incredibly useful for employees. Managers will be better leaders as they will be able to manage change positively and creatively. So not only is it beneficial for employees, it's also beneficial for your managers and leaders. Positive attitudes. If everyone can have a say, we talk about democratic leadership style later on in grade 12. If you can allow your staff to have a say, then generally they are going to be a lot more positive and follow your example. Improves motivation amongst staff members. So that leads into that previous example, positive attitudes. Right. So creative thinking links to problem solving. So you need to be creative in order to solve problems. So the meaning of problem solving: process of analyzing a situation to identify strategies to bring about change. Notice that it says strategies. It's not referring to one result. Okay, yes, you might decide on an ultimate decision, but you need to have different plans in place just in case one may need to be may not work out. All right, gathering facts that may include problem findings and problem solving. Okay, looking at problems can be solved by a group. That's very important. Again, if you get a group to contribute information, ideas, it allows you to have a different point of view. Alternative solutions are generated and critically evaluated by the group. All right. Okay, types of problem-solving techniques. Earlier, I referred to the fact that we've got different methods that will allow you to solve problems. And we're going to talk about a few here. The first one is the Delphi technique. All right, the Delphi technique, there are advantages and disadvantages to this technique. It does take a bit of time, but you'll see in a moment it can bring about very, very critical solutions and positive solutions to some problems that you may come across. So the first thing is that you've got a panel of experts. So they're experts in the field and with the relevant problem that you might have. Each of these experts are contacted individually, all right, individually, and they don't meet each other. All right, so that's important to take note of because it allows these experts to think for themselves. All right, so they're not actually showing any bias. They're not influenced by anybody else's point of view. So what happens is a questionnaire is designed and then it's distributed to those experts. Those experts then answer those questionnaires on their own. All right, those questionnaires are then referred back to the moderator who gives a summary of the answers, and then a feedback report is put together. Along with that feedback report, a second set of questions is given to the panel of experts. So they know what information came out of the first set of questionnaires, and they now have a second set of questions. This then allows the experts to provide further information or further answers to that second questionnaire, and then that is referred back to the moderator. The moderator then puts that all together in a nice box and ties a little bow and gives that to the directors, where the directors are then going to choose the best solution based on the responses that they've got from the experts. All right, so that is the Delphi technique. Very useful, gives very important responses from those experts, but it does take a little bit of time.
Yeah, so you mentioned like there are some advantages and disadvantages. Obviously, the biggest advantage is that you have experts. So it's people that know about a particular area of your concern in the business. So the feedback they're going to give you is going to be quite valuable.
For sure.
And most likely going to be correct.
Correct.
So you can make informed decisions. So yes, it does take a little bit of time, and sometimes the experts don't want to be involved in your process, or you might have to pay them a lot of money, so it can become expensive. And depending on how many questionnaires you have to develop, it can actually take a long time. But so yes, it can be useful for those very, very complex decisions, and normally going to be a long-term strategies where you need a bit of time to actually evaluate everything very clearly and so on. But it is a very, very useful technique because you're going to get proper feedback from your experts in the field. Provided they are experts, of course.
Yes, of course, of course. Yeah, so very, very useful technique to be used. All right, the next one that we're going to look at is the force field analysis technique. Now, you'll see I've got an image there that is going to explain the process of actually administering a force field analysis technique. And the reason why you would want to do this is to quantify it. All right, so when you look at certain aspects, if you're analyzing something, you want to be able to do a comparison and quantify it. So that's why we use ratings very often. So that's why when you do a review, you might be asked rate something 1 to 5. That allows you to quantify something. So let's go through this example that they've got here. The issue at hand is to upgrade a factory with new manufacturing equipment. All right, so that's the issue. We need to decide whether we are going to go for that change or we're going to look at something else. All right, so you've got on the left-hand side, you've got the forces for the change, and then on the right-hand side, you've got the forces against the change. All right, so then you'll see on the left-hand side, you've got a number of different points. So these are points that your employees can bring up, and then you'd list those down. If it's for or against, the change that we've listed in the middle there, and then you assign a rating. As you can see, the rating that they've given there is 1 to 4. Okay, so if it's a really, really important point that's been brought up and you feel like it needs a 4 rating, then you can do that. So as you can see, the first one on the left-hand side of the screen is a 4 rating. Then on the right-hand side, you've got a 3 rating, and so on and so forth. As you can see at the bottom, what you do now is that you total both sides. Okay, so from that illustration, you can see that the right-hand side, the forces against change are 11, whereas the forces for change are 10. So now you've quantified it, so it makes it a lot easier for you to make a decision based on the ratings that have been given. So this is maybe also takes a little bit of time, but it can be very useful because you know from the outset that you're going to come out with a decision on the other side of your exercise.
Yeah, it's also useful because you're asking a number of people for how they personally feel about it.
For sure.
So I will be subjective in my decision, but we will still get an overall picture of what everybody feels. So it will still be representative of everybody. So it is a very democratic process as well.
Yeah.
And grade 11s, this is a very popular testing question, or this area is very popular in terms of Delphi technique and the force field analysis. You will most often be asked to apply these techniques, and they'll be giving you a scenario, and in the scenario you're going to have to show how the technique has applied. So the first thing you're going to look for is that keywords. If they use the terms experts, then you know they're talking about the Delphi technique. If they're using forces for, forces against, advantages, disadvantages, ratings, those types of keywords, then you know it is the force field analysis that needs to be applied. But be aware that they do like to ask you for an application of this technique. So you're going to have to actually show how you are identifying, for example, in the force field analysis, what the forces are for a particular process, what the forces are against. They may or may not give that to you, or they might ask you to recommend what you think the forces are and forces are against, and then you can give your own rating. And in the end, what's important is you must show how you add the two sides up and what the final decision is. That's how the application question works with the force field analysis. And normally with the Delphi technique, they'll give you a scenario explaining the process of how experts have been involved and how questionnaires have been drawn up and sent back and analyzed, and new questions have been drawn up. So those are the key things that you have to look out for in these techniques. But be aware, it's not the only techniques that are available. It's just the two that we are focusing in today's revision session. Right, so next up, grade 11s, we're going to go over to stress and crisis management. It's the next topic for this revision session, and Mr. Edwards will again take us through this.
All right, so stress, crisis, and change management. It's basically describing COVID-19 and lockdown and the pandemic and the things that businesses have had to deal with. All right, so it's obviously a crisis situation, and which creates the stress that many of employees and business owners have been under for the last while. And they've had to change. So it's involving all three of those processes. All right, so we'll start off with the stress and the meaning of stress. Stress is the body's way of responding to change that requires a physical, mental, or emotional adjustment to that respond, or a particular response that can make you feel a little bit more comfortable with the situation. All right, so when you are stressed, you might have different ways in which you feel. Some people start to sweat, and all of those sorts of things come into play. You're anxious, and your blood pressure goes up, and we're going to look at different ways in which you can help yourself to get over those sorts of situations. But let's look at some causes of stress in the business environment. First and foremost, workload. All right, so if you're working in a situation where you might be required to work 50 to 60-hour weeks, that can create an immense amount of stress. Those situations where you're waking up in the middle of the night and you're thinking about work. All right, the organizational culture, there might be something rather off with regards to the organization and what it values. Okay, you might not agree with that. Okay, your role within the organization. You might not you might not understand what your role in that organization is. And because of that, you become anxious, and there might be conflict that arises there. Participation and management, all right? Maybe you're not be participating in the business, and also you might not agree with how the management are controlling things or leading the situation. Okay, your work content. Unfortunately, your work content might not be very interesting, and that can cause a great deal of stress, and you might not be enjoying your work, so you're not necessarily motivated. And then working hours, which leads into that first note, which I said workload. Okay, so your workload might be slightly longer than it needs to be. Right, let's have a look at some importance of stress management. Some results of stress within the working environment. Okay, firstly, often one of the results is absenteeism. Okay, you can often see in a workplace, if there's a great deal of absenteeism, then you can start to see some identification, or it might be an identification that there is stress amongst the staff.
We actually see this in the school quite often.
Sure.
If the teacher's under stress, you see suddenly they are absent, trying to catch up with the worker, or more specifically with the pupils as it gets closer to exam time. And they're trying to get their projects done before the exams start and so on. Then they take days off to actually manage themselves.
Yep.
And the absenteeism picks up in the school towards that time. So, yeah, heavy workload can result to a lot of stress, which can result in absence in the workplace.
Definitely. And that's why sometimes time management is important. Yeah. But, I mean, if your workload doesn't allow for it, I mean, we know the students are under pressure before exams, and sometimes that's because of the deadlines have been provided.
And sometimes they get physically sick from the stress as well.
Definitely.
And so it's not just because they have a workload and they want to finish it. Sometimes they actually show physical signs from stress, which shows itself as an illness as well.
For sure.
And then they have to have that treated before they can carry on as well. So there's lots of reasons for this absence, but absence is definitely a key factor to indicate that there is stress in the workplace.
Yep, definitely. So the result might be that some staff have a grievance, or they complain because of the situation that they're under, or the stress that they're under at the workplace. All right. Often you can identify conflict between staff members, or conflict between management and particular staff members because of that stress that they're under. Unfortunately, your customer service might become a problem, and because your staff members might not be happy in their job, that will then relay across to how they're dealing with their customers. There's always going to be resistance to change, because there might be a comfort zone. The employees often find themselves in a comfort zone, and because they're in a stressful situation, they don't necessarily want to change. Unproductive labor force. Okay, if you're not motivated, you're under stress, the result is also going to be that you're not going to be very productive at all. And that relates to the last one there, where it's referring to poor performance.
And there's just one there on top that you skipped over there, which is poor judgment. So because people because they are stressed and they don't have much time, they can't think through things clearly, and they just go with the first decision that comes to them, and it leads to poor judgment quite often, which results in extra work again, extra stress, extra expenses for the business, and so on as well. So that's quite an important one as well. So we have to actually learn how to manage with our stress, so that these things don't actually have an impact
100%.
as much of an impact. We'll never be able to live a stress-free life, unfortunately. But learning how to manage the stress is quite important.
All right, so going on with that, ways to manage stress, and this is something that's important for both employees and the employer to understand. The first one is be aware of your needs and wants. If your body is requiring you to have enough sleep, then you need to adapt. You need to time manage, or manage your time accordingly, so that you can have a good night's sleep. Predict stressful situations and make changes where possible. So if you know that there's going to be a stressful situation coming up, as we mentioned earlier, your students, you guys, when it comes to exams, it's quite a stressful period, but you know, if you are prepared and you've gone through your revision timetable, you know that you might not be as stressed as it would be when you are not prepared. Okay, that leads into the next one where it says manage your time accordingly. Make sure that you've allocated specific time for yourself, for your family, for your homework. And in a working environment, make sure that you have a specific time to complete all your tasks. Avoid conflict where possible. You know, when you're in a conflict situation, your anxiety rises, and that also inhibits you to make the right decisions. As I said earlier, get enough sleep. Find a relaxation technique that works for you. I've had discussions with learners in my class. Some of them like to go outdoors, they like to go for a run, and also play sport. Those are methods that can be used in order to relax. Follow a balanced lifestyle. Right, that doesn't mean you sit on your phone until 11 o'clock at night. That's not necessarily a balanced lifestyle. Get outside and in a business environment, make sure that there's, as an entrepreneur, as a leader, you allow your staff time to actually live that balanced lifestyle. Find creative ways to balance work with relaxation. You'll find some of these new businesses like the Facebooks, the Googles, there's interesting ways in which they allow staff to relax. You have these images of them playing table tennis and pool and those sorts of things, moments when they can actually allow themselves to relax. Okay, because they come back stronger and they're in a mindset where chances are they'll be a little bit more productive.
It's quite important to have those few minutes breaks in between, just to take your mind off something that is stressing you, and just do something that's going to lead to de-stressing. Whether it be a 10-minute nap, whether it be chatting to someone, whether it be playing pool or something. And I see a lot of businesses actually do that to make sure there's a place where people can relax. And I know in a lot of workplaces that where they have these things, they actually say there's no work allowed in this area. There's no laptops allowed unless you are searching for something on the internet. But there is absolutely no work allowed in this area because this area is only for relaxation. So a lot of places are doing that because they realize that people spend a lot of time at work, and it's not possible to be working the entire day. You need to have these breaks so that you can switch off, relax, unwind, and when you start working again, like you said, you're going to be extra productive, or your productivity levels will be at its maximum, and that's when the business actually benefits. So investing in things like having areas where there's a place to relax is actually going to benefit the business in the long run. So it might be a short-term expense, but a big benefit to the business. Also leads to a lot of things like staff happiness. Definitely. And when staff are happy, they stay with the company. So there's lots of added benefits that come with having a place where staff can just be relaxed. I
always, when you mention that about staff being happy, I always think of Richard Branson. He's the founder and CEO of Virgin. And he always says, you take care of your employees will take care of the customer. And that's so critical. And if your employees are happy, they're going to stick around and they're going to work hard for your business. It's a difficult situation these days, though, because many people are working from home. And there's no cutoff between home and work. And I think that a lot of businesses are looking at ways in which to ensure that we have breakaway situations where people don't necessarily need to be focused on their laptop and waiting for the next email to come through. I know
when we were in the height of COVID, we had our staff meeting online from home, and then immediately following the staff meeting, there was a half an hour for coffee, and we just stay online and we'll have our coffee from our house but chat to everybody just to relax before we actually get our day started. And that actually worked wonders because you feel like you've communicated with your friends and colleagues, and now you're ready to start the day.
Look, this lockdown period has presented new ways of doing things. Coffee breaks over Zoom. All right, so we move from stress into crisis. All right, so a crisis is any event that is expected to lead to an unstable and dangerous situation affecting the business. There's numerous examples which we will refer to in a moment. As you can see in the image on the right-hand side of the screen, that is the coronavirus having an effect on a city environment. you'll see in Cape Town here, the CBD is a lot less busy than it has been in the past. And that is a lot to do with the coronavirus. So looking at some examples of crises that you might find in the workplace, financial crisis. So if we go back to 2008, 2009, you guys might not recall, but there was a massive financial crisis, and it affected every business that was seeking to make a profit. Even last year, 2020, yes, we had the pandemic, but in many respects it was worse than the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. Right, moving on to the technological crisis. An example that comes to mind, if you're a banking institution, every now and again you hear of a glitch that's taken place on online, or the online banking is down. That is a technological crisis. There was one recently that hit Virgin Active, and that's continued to cause a great deal of strain on the business. Natural crisis, that can be anything to do with a flood, fires that we had in Cape Town recently, that's an example. UCT has had to adapt to that. Workplace violence, okay? Workplace violence could be a result of protest action that's taken place. Personnel crisis, okay? Personnel being your staff. There might be a crisis within the staff room. Something has happened, someone has passed away, something along those lines. Organizational crisis, that can refer to the dealings within the organization, and maybe some issues with regards to the management and how they have controlled the business.
Again, grade 11s, this is a nice area where you can find examples that could be used in an essay, specifically if the essay is about stress and crisis management. For each of these aspects which you see over here, financial, technological, natural, workplace violence, personnel, there are plenty of examples of each of those. So if you can find one example of each of that, you should set yourself up quite nicely for getting those originality marks in your essay questions. So remember those originality marks, where you have to have 2 examples somewhere in the body of the essay. It has to be recent and relevant. So it must be relevant to what you're speaking about, and it has to be recent. So it needs to be something that happened in the last year. So there are lots of examples that are available. So make sure that's part of your preparation for the exams, that you actually have prepared examples. You can't make up an example in the exam. You're going to have to actually make notes and make examples, write them down, and actually study them as well as part of your study process. Okay, let's carry on with the section. Just
one thing with regards to that originality mark. I was saying to my learners the other day, saying that you can find an example for originality mark in your essay just related to COVID-19 lockdown and the effects that it's had on a business. So you can find numerous examples. You can prepare for each section of work. You might be able to find a COVID-19 lockdown related originality mark. I have no doubt. So just keep that in mind. That's a handy tip. Ways businesses can deal with crises in the workplace. All right. Firstly, communicate the crisis with all those involved, even if there isn't a solution yet. It is very important to be transparent. If you're transparent, it means that your employees are going to trust you as an entrepreneur, as the manager. And trust is critical when it comes to your staff. Communicate the potential resolution. So as you are deciding on a resolution to solve the problem, you communicate that across to your staff. Have a flexible or growth mindset. Look as to how you can adapt. Don't have it as specific. This is the only way that we are going to solve the problem. You need to adapt in these circumstances. And then evaluate the situation. So once you've made the decision and you've put it in place, evaluate whether it has been successful. If not, you might need to make a couple of changes. Right, now we're going to look at some causes of change. Now bear in mind that we might have internal causes and external causes for change. Internal being within the business. An example is changes in the direction and objectives. So this might be something that the board of directors have insisted on, that you are changing your direction, you're changing your objectives, and many staff might not appreciate that. We'll move on to the ways in which you can solve that later. External environment, these are things that are happening outside the business, right? Just like the SWOT analysis, the strengths and the weaknesses are internal, opportunities and threats are external. The external environment, causes of change, one example would be development of technology. We need to keep up. As business owners, we need to make sure that we are implementing the best possible techniques and using the best possible technology to solve problems. All right, so now when we look at different issues within a business environment, there's often theories that have been put in place or that people have researched ways in which to best implement change. So this is an example, John Kotter's 8-stage change model. So there's 8 stages to this change model that he refers to. Firstly, you need to create an urgency within the business, okay, to make sure that they are understanding that a change is necessary. Make sure that they're understanding the vision and empowering action when putting in place the mechanisms to change, highlighting different aspects that are of importance, and then ensure that everybody is working together. Okay? Communicating, making sure that everybody understands their role and what they need to do in these circumstances. And also short-term successes, milestones. Very important in a business environment. You don't necessarily want to just talk about the successes as in the end result. You want to talk about the milestones so that people continue to be confident, they continue to be motivated in implementing the change. And then right at the end, value the change. Make sure that everybody is understanding as to what the change was and everybody knows what the value of that change has been. Okay, we're going to look at a couple of examples of changes that people and businesses deal with at the moment. Bearing in mind that there are other examples of changes that we might come across. These are just 4 that have been included in the syllabus. So firstly, retrenchment. Retrenchment is the resulting of maybe bad situations within a business where they cannot afford to keep staff on. So then what they do, they retrench them, and there's often a retrenchment package. So the staff are asked to leave and they receive a package when they leave the business. All right, unemployment. This is slightly different to retrenchment because it's people that are unemployed and are seeking work, okay, and unfortunately they are unable to find work. Okay, the next one is globalization. You'll see the image on the left-hand side of the screen at the top there. We are in a globalized world, and with the advent of technology, it has meant that we are even more globalized than we have been in the past. So it means that we are able to purchase something from another country, and chances are within a couple of weeks it will be delivered this side. We're able to communicate with people in other countries, even if they're in different time zones. And we can use different mechanisms like Zoom, we can use Skype, we can use Microsoft Teams, Google. All of them have these mechanisms in place, which is encouraging globalization. Okay, we do have disadvantages and advantages of globalization as well. Right, then affirmative action is the mechanism in employment whereby it's trying to redress some of the inequalities of the past. All right, so we're going to look at two issues there, globalization and affirmative action, and looking at strategies that businesses can use to deal with globalization and affirmative action. Firstly, we'll look at globalization. Be aware of the changes in your related industry. Be aware of new technologies that are taking place. Because if there's a new technology and you are not one of the first to actually introduce that technology to your production process, for example, then you are going to fall behind your competition. The next one is keep abreast of new technologies, new processes, new developments. Okay, that leads into what I said earlier. Investigate overseas markets for your products. So maybe you've got a particular product that might be attractive overseas. So you need to look at different ways in which you can expand your market, because South Africa might be a limited market, but if you're wanting to expand, you have options overseas. Source overseas manufacturers, materials, and suppliers. You might get products that are of a better quality. You might get products that are slightly cheaper. So, in turn, you can assist your customers by providing a product that's better quality or cheaper. All right. The next one is affirmative action. Right, so as I said earlier, affirmative action is redressing inequalities of the past. So the first one that you can look at is increasing skills level in order to be more competitive. So you're increasing the skill level of your staff so that they would be, it would be worthwhile for them to be in different positions. They could be promoted into management positions, but they need to be, their skill level might need to be increased as well. Acknowledge and respect differences within the workplace. That's critical. We're in a very diverse country, and that can be a very, very important aspect of a business. So that's acknowledging and respecting differences within the staff complement. And then look for self-employment opportunities. So this might be a way in which to solve the affirmative action issue that we come up against. All right, I'm going to hand you across to Mr. de Klerk, who will continue with professionalism and ethics.
Right, grade 11, we'll jump straight into professionalism and ethics, our third topic for today's revision session. And it's important to know what the difference is between professionalism and ethics. So what we're going to look at in this section of work is firstly the meaning of ethical and professional behavior, the difference between professionalism and ethics, the principles of professionalism, the principles of ethics, the theories of ethics, the ways in which professional, ethical, and effective business practice should be conducted, and the advantages or the benefits of good ethics in the workplace. Okay, so here we have the meaning of ethical and professional behavior. So firstly, let's take a look at the ethical behavior. It refers to acting in ways that's consistent with what society and individuals think are good values. So if you look at that first bullet point, the key words there is what societies and individuals think are good values. If you switch over to professional behavior and you look at that first bullet point there, it says professionalism refers to the competent and skillful behavior expected of a professional workplace, of a professional person. So ethical behavior is more about what's expected according to what society says is accepted as ethical, whereas professional behavior is what is accepted in the workplace. So that's the key difference between ethical behavior and professional behavior. So let's just run through the other points under ethical behavior. So we already said that it's acting in ways that's consistent with what society and individuals think are good values. Ethical behavior is expected from every employee in the business, and it means that the highest legal and moral standards are upheld when dealing with stakeholders of the business as well. But what's important there, grade 11s, is you should know those first two bullet points of each, because most likely this question will be worth about 4 to 6 marks. So those first two bullet points under each, where you're explaining that the ethical behavior is what society views as good values, and professional behavior is what the business views as good business behavior, or it's the behavior that is expected of you in the workplace. Okay, so coming back to professional behavior, we said it's what the business, it's the skills that you have, it's how competent you are in the workplace, and it's how you are expected to act in the workplace. It's normally guided by a code of ethics in the workplace. So like you guys have a code of conduct as pupils in the schools, staff members have a code of ethics that guides how we conduct our behavior in the workplace. It involves things like how we speak to you as pupils, how we speak to your parents, how we respond to emails, and so on, just to make sure that we are acting in a manner that is viewed as professional within our business. Okay, then the professional behavior also includes taking pride in your actions and never compromising your standards. Okay, so that's a personal thing with regards to compromising your standards. So it's you taking pride in what you do, your work that you do, what you are putting out there into the world, and making sure you're not compromising your standards. And then the last point there is professionalism is an attitude towards what you do towards other people around you. Okay, so being professional is an attitude, grade 11s. So you can learn how to be professional. Often we go into a workplace, especially when we start working, and we don't necessarily know what constitutes professionalism, but we learn that as we go along, and it's an attitude that we have that we need to be willing to learn about what professionalism is so that we can conduct our behavior and our activities in a professional manner. Right, then in your workbooks, in your telematics workbooks, you were given a number of statements. So this is essentially trying to find out the definitions, or not the definitions, but you're indicating the difference between ethics and professionalism. So you have to look at what ethics is, you have to look at what professionalism is, and you have to say which of these statements is referring to ethics and which of these statements is referring to the professionalism aspect. So let's take a look at what these answers are. So you can fill these in as you are working through your workbooks. So the first one, applying a code of conduct of a professional business. This is about what's happening inside the business. So we spoke about that code of conduct a few seconds ago. So therefore, this has to form part of professionalism. Then the next statement that was there, refers to the principles of right and wrong accepted by society. Okay, so those first 2 points here are referring to the first 2 bullet points within our definition of ethics and professionalism. So we could see here the first aspect was applying a code of conduct, and a code of conduct will only exist in a workplace. So therefore, they're talking about how you behave in the workplace. So that must be professionalism. The second one refers to what is right and wrong by society's standards. So therefore, that must be part of ethics. The third one refers to what's right and wrong and acceptable in the business. So there's your keywords, in the business. So therefore, that has to be professionalism once again. Okay, it includes guidelines on employees' appearances, communication, attitude, and responsibility. Again, those are things that you're going to have to consider in the workplace. How are you going to dress? How are you going to communicate? What's your attitude like in the workplace? What's your responsibility? How are you going to conduct your activities in a responsible manner? So that's all about what's happening in the workplace, and therefore that has to be part of professionalism. Okay, then conforms to a set of values that are morally accepted. Okay, so morally, it's your individual morals. Therefore, that's what makes up what society believes is going to be acceptable. So therefore, this has to be part of ethics. And then again, forms part of a code of conduct to guide the employees to act ethically. This also forms part of ethics. Okay, so ethics will form part of the code of conduct. So ethics is also linked to professionalism, but ethics will form part of the code of conduct, which will help the employees to act in a manner that is ethical. Okay. Number 7 involves the following principles of right and wrong in business practices. So there's your keywords, business practices as well. So it will be ethics. Okay, so it involves following the principles of right and wrong in the business practice. And then a set of standards of expected behavior is going to be professionalism. So if you are expected to behave in a certain way, that's normally going to be in the workplace as well. So that will form part of professionalism. Focuses on upholding the reputation of a business or profession is also going to be part of ethics. And then finally, focusing on developing a moral compass for decision making is going to be part of professionalism. But again, focus on those first 2 bullet points that we looked at when it came to ethics and professionalism, just to make sure you understand that when it comes to ethics, we're talking about what is morally accepted by society standards and what society views as right and wrong. And when it comes to professionalism, it's what is accepted in your workplace and how you should be conducting your behavior in the workplace. Right, so here we can see a summary of what we just looked at. So we've allocated each of those statements to be part of professionalism and ethics. So what I've done is I've just summarized it all for you, giving you a list of items that explains the difference between ethics and professionalism. So when you are asked to describe the difference between ethics and professionalism, it's not going to be worth more than 8 marks. So if it's going to be one question where they say describe or explain the difference between ethics and professionalism, you should only learn at 2 points under each. Okay, don't learn more than that, because you're just going to fill your brain up with too much information, and that might cause confusion in the examination. So it's never going to be worth more than 8 marks unless it is part of an essay question. Okay, so generally you want to learn 2 or 3 bullet points under each, and when it comes to the questioning in the exam or tests, look at the mark allocation. If it's in section B and it's 8 marks, it's going to be 4 marks for professionalism and 4 marks for ethics. So you need 2 statements underneath each. If it is an essay question, it will normally be about 10 to 12 marks. So then you'll need about, then you'll need some more information. So you might need 3 points under professionalism and 3 points under ethics. So bear that in mind. Don't study everything. You should just know about 2 or 3, the 2 or 3 that you are most comfortable with, the 2 or 3 that you understand the most. And also be aware that when they ask about the difference between ethics and professionalism, they're normally going to say explain or differentiate, and that's where the marks are going to be split. So be aware that the marks will also be split. So you're going to have a statement that gets made, and then you're going to have a clarifier as well to get the second mark as well. But we'll talk about those action verbs a little bit later in the exam tips section. Okay, then we come to the principles of professionalism. So let's quickly look at what these principles are. These principles are confidentiality, respect, objectivity, integrity, and competency. Okay, so you were given this table, and you had to match the statement with the correct principle of professionalism. Okay, so let's see where they fall into place. So in statement 1, they say employers apply their knowledge and skills in the interest of society as well as the environment. Okay, so let's see what they're talking about. They're talking about competency. And your keywords there to look out for is employers apply their knowledge and skills in the interest of society and the environment. So when you're talking about knowledge and skills, we're saying you are applying your knowledge and skills. You are able to do the job, therefore you are competent. Okay, so look at those keywords where they say you're applying the knowledge and skills. If they're talking about knowledge and skills, they're saying you have the ability to do the job. Therefore, it links to competency as the principle of professionalism. The second statement there is employers work with honesty according to the law and generally accepted norms of professional conduct. Okay, so let's see which of the principles applies to that statement. And that's going to be integrity. Okay, so when we talk about integrity, we talk about doing the right thing. Okay, so if you are a person with high levels of integrity, it means you are always going to do the responsible thing. You're always going to do the right thing. So let's take a look at the keywords there to help guide you as to why this links up with integrity. Okay, so the keywords there is honesty, according to the law, and generally accepted norms. So if we're doing things honestly, according to the law and according to generally accepted norms, it means we are doing the things the right way. So therefore that will link to integrity. Okay, the third statement there, employees respect the dignity and rights of others and the image of the profession or the business. Okay, and your keyword there is actually the second word that's there. Employees respect the dignity. Okay, so they are giving you that clue. Employees respect the dignity. The moment you respect something, they are obviously talking about the respect principle of professionalism. Okay, so if we respect someone's dignity, the rights, we treat them with respect, and therefore it links to that principle of professionalism. The second last statement there, employees act in a way that is fair and just without any bias or favor. Okay, so if you look at the wording there, you're acting without bias or favor. Okay, so you're not putting your feelings and your needs ahead of anyone else in your decision making. You are looking at the facts and you are making your decisions based on the facts. Okay, so if you are acting in a way that is fair and just without any bias, you're not favoring anybody, it means you are looking at things objectively. Okay, so we always talk about looking at things objectively and subjectively. Okay, when you are looking at things in a subjective manner, it means that you are letting your own feelings, your own emotions get involved in your decision-making process. Okay, so it means it may not necessarily be a fair outcome that you come up with. Okay, but when you are looking at things objectively, it means you're taking yourself completely away, or your personal feelings away from the situation. You're not letting those personal feelings get involved in how you are going to make your decision. You look at things objectively. Okay, so therefore, the principle of professionalism that we're looking at here is going to be objectivity. Okay, and the last statement by default is going to be confidentiality. But when we look at the statement, it's quite clear when we say employers do not divulge any details of the business or clients to others or use confidential information for their own benefit. So there we can clearly see the statement is leading towards not using anyone's information for your own benefit, or not divulging or giving anyone's information to someone else without their permission. And that's actually an interesting point there, because we've all heard about the POPIA Act that has just been released, when it comes to the personal and private information of people, that we actually legally now are not allowed to share information without anyone's permission.
Yeah,
Okay?
yeah.
And so this is going to be quite a tricky situation, because we all used to just, for example, taking a photo, posting it up on social media, but there's going to come a time we have to ask the people for permission to actually post something. And,
I think it's going to present some complicated ways of doing things.
Yeah.
I mean, just further on your point, WhatsApp and Facebook have been in the news recently because they're disputing a number of the laws that have been put in place. Recently, WhatsApp or Facebook is suing Indian government because of some of the laws that have been put in place. And I know Facebook has also been negotiating with South African government recently because they're disputing some of the laws that are included in that POPIA Act.
Yeah. So I know there's a massive debate happening, and I'm sure there's going to be, because I mean, if you look at social media, that's what they are. That's their driver. That's
For
the
sure.
driving force is the images. That's what people want to see. But we're going to have to be very, very careful. Especially in the school environment, something as simple as posting a picture of your team playing sports
100%, yeah.
could be used against you. So just bear that in mind, and again, use as an example of something when it comes to professionalism, ethics, and confidentiality. If you are specifically speaking about that you can actually bring in the POPIA Act there as an example to show that, or as a recent example rather, to show that people's personal and private information are going to become very, very important. And companies that don't have the permission to use that are going to find themselves in a lot of hot water because of that.
If I can just add something to this section of work over here, you've got the 5 principles over there, but there's probably one or two that haven't been included. But you look at those, it's almost, they seem obvious. I mean, you wouldn't dispute that competency and integrity should be included in a professional environment. The difficulty is that often with the profit motive, sometimes those sorts of principles are bent, or the rules are not necessarily enforced. So it's important for entrepreneurs, for leaders, to ensure that these principles are implemented within a business environment and have them as your core culture within the business environment. So that's just one thing I wanted to add there.
Okay. All right, then we'll move on to the principles of ethics. And again, I'll show you the different principles of ethics, and then we'll see if we can find the link. So the principles of ethics are commitment, avoiding self-interest, transparency, environment responsibility, and caring. So again, you were given a table where you were given a number of statements, and you had to apply the correct principle or state which principle was the correct one. Okay, so let's look at the first statement. It says, pay heed to transparency and full disclosure of information. Okay, so your keyword in that statement is already there. Pay heed to transparency and full disclosure. So that therefore has to link to transparency. So when we talk about transparency, grade 11s, we're talking about being open in your dealings, being honest in your dealings, not having any hidden agendas or trying to hide information, because that can actually get you into trouble as a business. If you hide information, especially with the Consumer Protection Act and those things, you could actually find yourself in trouble. So for example, specifically because we're talking about professionalism and ethics, if you enter a credit agreement, the business has to give you the terms and conditions. They have to explain that to you in a language of your choice, provided it's one of the official languages of South Africa, because you need to know every single term and condition of that. You need to know whether you are able to qualify for that credit or not. If a business says, or when you apply for credit, we should know that they do a credit check. And if you don't qualify for the credit by law, then the business is not supposed to give you that credit. If they do and you can't afford to pay it, that business will actually lose out, and the business will lose that money, not you as the customer. So when it comes to transparency, the businesses have to be clear about what they are saying, what their objectives are, not trying to hide any information. So transparency is very important to the business, and it's sometimes something that's very questionable in the business as well, because we're always trying to see what are people's hidden agenda, what do they really want. Okay, so as one of the core principles of ethics in the business, we should always strive to have transparency, tell people what's going on, what the plan is, what the objectives, be honest with them so that people know exactly what you are doing. If there's any doubt about transparency, it's going to create conflict in the workplace. Right, the next statement there is avoid conflict of interest, and that's going to be avoid self-interest. Okay, so you must try and avoid conflict of interest. So try and avoid conflict where you have interest in that conflict. So for example, you might be friends with two people and they have a conflict with each other and they're both coming with two different stories, and now you have to pick a side. Okay, so because you have self-interest, you cannot be involved in that decision. Or for example, if you are a manager and two people are being disciplined, you have to remove yourself from that situation because now you are not necessarily going to have an objective opinion. You might favor your friend, and the moment there's bias in your decision, it's going to be an unfair solution that you're going to come up. Or the moment people feel that you might be siding with your friend, there's going to be conflict in the workplace. So you have to avoid issues where there's going to be self-interest, where you are personally involved in that. You cannot, or when you have friends or you are personally involved with people who are involved with conflict or decision making, so you have to actually remove yourself from it, or you have to learn how to think objectively, because sometimes you can't remove yourself from that situation. So then you're going to have to think objectively. You're actually going to tell people, I'm going to take myself out of this as a friend. I'm going to look at the facts, and we can discuss the facts and see what the solution is going to be from there. Okay, but that's a very, very difficult thing to do. Okay, the third one is commitment, which is employers respect the dignity and the rights of others and the image of the profession or the business. Okay, so you are committed to the image of the profession or the business, and you respect the dignity and rights of others. Right, practicing social responsibility. If we look at the word social responsibility, the word social alone means people. Okay, so people, if we are acting responsibly towards people, we're actually going to show that we are caring. So that's going to be the principle of ethics that we link to practicing social responsibility. And then the last one, it's obvious there, looking after the environment. The word environment is already there. So that's going to be the principle of ethics that is linked to looking after the environment. So it's quite important when it comes to ethics in the workplace that the business actually has a responsibility of looking after the people, the planet, and its profits. So we know that businesses are ultimately trying to maximize their profits, okay? But they have to maximize their profits in a way that they are responsible to people. So whatever their actions are as a business, they cannot harm any people, and they should have a minimum impact on the environment. If they can try not to harm the environment, they should do so, but there needs to be a minimum impact which will be guided by different standards in different industries when it comes to the carbon footprint and so on of the business. So when it comes to the business, they have this code of ethics, the King Code, which has principles like responsibility, accountability, transparency, everything we've seen a bit earlier. So those are the principles of good business practice that every business actually has to abide to, and that guides how the business is going to make profits in a responsible manner, or be able to maximize their profits in a way that's going to be responsible to the people that they are serving, as well as the planet that they are using to produce their product or service in their business. Okay, right, we're now going to move on to the theories of ethics. We have a number of theories. The first one is the consequential theory. So basically, when we're talking about the consequential theory, we are talking about we make our decisions based on what the consequence is going to be. Okay? And that will determine what's right or wrong for me. Okay? So if I feel that there's going to be no consequence for something, then I might feel that that is going to be the right thing to do. If there's going to be big consequence for me, that might convince me that that is the wrong thing to do. So here, when we are using the consequential theory, we are looking at what the consequence is. So we're looking ahead after we've made our decision. We say, this is what my decision is. If I go with this decision, what are the consequences? And that consequences will determine whether I actually go ahead or not. Now remember, ethics is subjective. It's what's inside you, your morals and your values. So you might view something as not being a consequence. I might view something as being a consequence. For example, if we take two people, one person earns maybe 5,000 Rand a month and they're struggling to get by. One person earns 5 million Rand a month and they are struggling to get by. And they're both in a hurry to get somewhere. Person A might decide, I'm not going to drive fast, I'm not going to speed, because the consequence is I can get into an accident, I can get a fine, and I can't afford those extra expenses. So therefore, it's the right thing for me to do not to speed. Right? And person B might say, well, I've got a lot of money, I can afford the fine, and if anything else happens, I can afford to replace any damages. And they might decide that it's the right thing for them to then speed. Obviously, we know speeding is against the law, so it is just the wrong thing. But those are the consequential thoughts that come with the consequential theory. So it's about what is my consequence and how do I feel about that consequence. That will determine whether I feel that something is right or whether something is wrong. Okay, then we have the next one, which is the common good approach. And this ensures that the business values and ethical principles are in line with what society views. So with the society in which the business operates in. Sorry, let me just read that again. I read that terribly. So it ensures that the business's values and ethical principles are in line with the society in which they operate in. It recognizes that ethics and values vary from area to area and from country to country. So your decisions using the common good approach is you're going to do what's best for everyone. Okay, so if there's a common good, it means it's best for everyone. So you're going to evaluate what your decision might be, and you're going to see what is best for everyone, and I'm going to go with that one. So you're going to decide if option A is the best for everyone, that's the right option to go with. That's the ethical option to go with. So you're going to look at what the society in which you operate in. You're going to look at what's good for them, because like it says there, it's different from society to society, different from community to community, different from country to country. Okay, so you're going to look at your own society within which you operate, and you make your decision based on that. Okay, and the third one is the rights approach, and this focuses on individuals' rights where people are treated with respect and dignity. And it says no person should be ill-treated, and businesses does not impose its mission or products on people. So here, with the rights approach, we're looking at what are your rights as a customer? What are your rights as a business? What are your rights as an individual? What are your rights as a society? Okay, whether it be according to the business's laws, such as the Consumer Protection Act and so on, or whether it be according to the Bill of Rights and your human rights that you have just by virtue of being born. Okay, so we are not going to go against anything that's going to damage your rights as either a human being or as a customer. So we look at what are your rights, and whatever our decision is, it's not going to go against what your rights are as an individual. So those are the three theories of ethics: the consequential theory, the common good approach, and the rights approach. Okay, then we're going to quickly look at the ways in which professional, ethical, and effective business practice should be conducted. And this is a good activity because this is the match the column activity that you normally get in section A. Okay, so when you study this work, you should be able to clearly identify what the missing word is. Okay, so it says the first statement: refrain from starting a venture using other businesses' ideas that are, and that's going to be protected by law. Okay, so you can't start one business venture based on someone else's business ventures that's protected by law. It's still viewed as unethical if it is not protected by law. So if they don't have a copyright, it's still going to, so society will still view it as being unethical. That will still have a negative impact on your business. Okay, then number 2, business decisions and actions must be transparent to all stakeholders. So there's that word transparent coming through again. And remember, all the stakeholders include your employees, it includes your competitors, your suppliers, the people living around your area in which you're operating in. Those are all your stakeholders, and your decisions and actions must be clear and transparent to all of them. The third one, businesses should be something for their decisions and actions, and they should be accountable for their decisions and actions. So they must take responsibility and acknowledge whatever happens, it's because of the decisions that they have made. And if it is good things, they must be positive about the good things that have come from the decisions. If it's bad, they must be able to deal with that as well. Okay. Number 4, hire something accountants, financial officers with good credentials. Hire responsible accountants and financial officers with good credentials. Okay, so here we're talking about your financial reporting. And you want to have responsible accountants or financial officers with good credentials, so they've got a good track record of doing the work properly. But the key word is they're responsible. It means that they're going to do the right thing. So they're not going to make your books reflect something that's not there. It's going to be honest, because remember, your profits need to be taxed, and that tax goes to SARS, and SARS uses that money, or say rather the government uses the money collected by SARS to pay for our homeless people, to pay for unemployment grants, to pay for childcare grants, so to look after society's needs. That is what the government uses that money that's collected by SARS for. Okay, so if we are dishonest and we're not giving them enough tax, then they're not able to pay for all those things that they need to pay for. Okay, so you need to hire responsible accountants or financial officers. Then there needs to be regular payment of taxes, depending on what option your business has decided on. How are you going to pay it? Are you going to pay it once a year? Are you going to pay it quarterly, or so on? Are you going to pay it ahead of time? Are you going to pay it after? That depends on what your decision is when you register your business with SARS. Or not with SARS, but when you register your taxes with SARS for the business. Okay, draw up a code of ethics or conduct. So that's going to guide the people in terms of their behavior in the workplace. Okay, ongoing training for employees to make sure that their skills are up to date, and those with potential for developing into management positions, they can receive the necessary training they need so that they then can apply for those management positions. All right, performance measurement systems should be in place to measure the success of your activities in the workplace and what you are trying to achieve, and then providing good quality products to consumers, and we'll look at quality a little bit later. Okay, so let's lastly look at the advantages or benefits of ethics in the workplace. It builds a good reputation for your business. Now, when your business has a good reputation, there are lots of positives because of that. And again, when they talk about these advantages, you will often have to explain them. So you're going to have to give the clarifier, so the statement and the clarifier. So what I've given you is the statement, and what I'm going to say is the clarifier. So what you see on the screen right now are the statements. That's going to give you 1 mark per bullet point, and then as I explain them, whatever I'm explaining is going to be the second mark for clarifying the item. So first one there, builds a good reputation. Okay, so what's the result of looking, or what's the result of the good reputation? Okay, so you normally ask yourselves the question after the statement: how, what, when, why, who, and so on, to find out what your clarifying statement should be. So if you have a good reputation, you're going to gain more customers, or you're going to get staff from other companies who want to come and work for you, or highly qualified staff. Okay, so those are some of the benefits of having a good reputation. Okay, and with a good reputation, you might be able to increase your price without losing customer bases, because they want your product because of the good quality reputation that you have. Okay, the next one there is creating loyal customers. And the moment you have good ethics and customers can see that you are practicing good ethics, and they also believe in the ethics that you show, you are going to get loyal customers. What's the benefit of loyal customers? Loyal customers return to the business. They are repeat customers. So you're going to continuously have a customer base where people are going to be spending their money on your businesses, which means your profitability will increase. Okay, the next one is keep staff morale high. And we've spoken about this a bit earlier. When staff are happy in the workplace, they're going to be staying in the workplace. They're not going to be looking for employment opportunities elsewhere. Right? We mentioned Richard Branson earlier. So another one of his many quotes that he has is: train staff so that they are good enough to leave, but treat them well so that they don't want to leave.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's another one of his famous quotes. Okay, and the last one there is boost investor confidence. So that basically means that you are able to get people to invest in your business. And when people can invest in your business, you're going to have more money to expand and grow your business, which again leads to more future profits. Okay, grade 11s, we're going to take a short break, give you a time to just get a quick refreshment, and then we'll come back with the last 2 sections of work. We'll see you in a few moments.